Hello again, welcome back. Let's continue with the session. Having listened to Julie Lawson, it's clear that we have homework to do. We need to check on this report and the bunch of data that there is online. So there's still a lot to do for all of us. Remember that there's the Mentimeter where you can post your questions. You need to access menti.com. The code you need to include is 78939039. And that's where you want to post all your questions or the doubts, remarks for the speakers. We still continue in the European arena. We are going to talk about collaboration models now, and we will see what they look like and what the future of those collaboration models look like. We will have Sorcha Edwards as a moderator, Secretary General at Housing Europe. The floor is yours, Sorcha. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really great to be here. I think we can clearly see that Barcelona and the current administration running the housing strategy is really aware of the urgency of this issue for citizens facing increasing unaffordability of house prices, increasing mismatch between incomes and what they have to pay for housing. So I think a lot of eyes are on Barcelona because we see that they are really taking the urgency of this matter for people really seriously and doing everything within their capacity to mobilize on that. So it's really an honor to be here today to meet more of you in person and to chair this short panel. So today what we're going to be looking at is the different collaboration models going on to tackle this problem that is facing citizens across the region. And I think it was really nice to kick off indeed with Julie Lawson, so this Housing 2030 study, because I think it's a good reminder that the housing projects that we are working on are working within a system. And it's very hard to have successful projects if we don't try to get that system right. So she covered the very broad angle, so looking at the basics, the nuts and bolts, the land governance, the finance, the regulation, and of course how to bring in the climate adaptation into that question. So I think it's really good to realize how important it is to get those fundamentals right, so that then the type of collaborations on the ground can have more an impact and can be upscaled. So Housing 2030 started indeed because the answers to the global housing crisis, which were being put on the table, were too simplified. So we were getting oversimplified answers coming from international entities saying, look, you just need very simple solution, deregulate the land, just build more, supply will meet demand. But what we have seen in the presentation from Julie, and what we're going to talk about in this panel and the rest of the panels, that no, it's not so simple, and it requires a lot of different strands to come together, and a lot of collaboration. And this is why I think going from this macro level, now we're going to sort of zoom in to the local contexts, to get an appreciation of what's going on, and also to get an appreciation of how important this type of exchange to inspire those local practices are, and why we are not, the realization that we are not all working alone, we are not in a vacuum, but it's a common challenge, and the maximum collaboration is the only way to really make progress. I will introduce us quickly. So myself, Sorcha Edwards, coming from Housing Europe. So we're working at European level, so the level of the European Union, to work for better regulation, better information, better finance for the housing stakeholders that are working at local level. And now I'm being joined here today, two of the panelists live, and one we will for the third we will have a recorded intervention. And really honoured to be here together with Hannah Sarah Emery Wright. So she's working for the London CLT, the communities manager. And so really on the the coal face, let's say, of the housing crisis, and really working together with those, working together with people to come up with solutions to this, to the housing issue. And also, we welcome, travelled from Italy today after a very busy period, very busy election period. We have the Vice Mayor of Bologna City Council, Emily Marion Clancy. So it's really great to have you both here today. And then we will be joined online just with a recording from Robin van Leyen. So he's working for the Dutch Federation of Social Housing Providers. So then we will get another sort of glimpse at another national approach to how they are solving how they're approaching the housing challenge. So I think the way we're going to kick it off is to get an insight into your two realities, the different collaboration, how you're working at local level, but also drawing on European experiences. And then we will have some time for some discussion and for some questions from you, which you can submit your questions live or via the chat channel. So please, let's go first over to London and hear from Hannah a little bit about the CLT, what you've drawn from European exchange and the reality on the ground there in London. Hannah, please. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for having me, first of all. It's really great to be here in this wonderful building, this wonderful complex. Do we have some slides for me as well? So, yeah, my name's Hannah, and as Sasha said, I'm the Communities Manager at London Community Land Trust. So I work with our residents, supporting them into their housing, deciding who gets to live there, and also supporting them to set up resident management companies and community spaces, whatever the need is in that local area. So first I'm going to talk a little bit, very briefly, just for context, about the sort of London context. Sorry, just trying to work out how to... Okay, great, wonderful. So, I mean, as I'm sure everyone is aware, like many big cities, London is becoming more and more affordable. That's okay, I think. Okay. London is becoming more and more affordable for local people. The majority of people that rent in London, their rent comes to about half of their monthly income. I think for me personally, I pay about £900 a month for a room, which is quite a lot. Basically, the house prices in the city are rising while kind of income stays stagnant. So houses are effectively becoming more and more unaffordable. There's sort of a context behind that. In the late 80s, the right to buy was brought in, which meant that people living in social housing could eventually staircase out and purchase the social housing, which was great for them to be able to own, but unfortunately it meant that a large amount of affordable housing stock was removed from the market, and not enough is being built fast enough to replace that need. So for a lot of people of my generation especially, their only option is really to leave the city, which means that you have people that need to do the jobs to keep the city running that can no longer stay there. So that's the sort of broad context. So a community land trust is effectively a movement that broadly grew out of the social rights movement in the States in the 60s and 70s, and has kind of been reappropriated in the UK and is sort of growing through Europe at the moment, but it's still a very nascent sector. So community land trust kind of means different things in different contexts, but essentially there's a belief that communities should have a say in the homes that are built in the area, and that housing should be genuinely affordable, which in our case specifically means linked to what people earn, but that it should be affordable and protected in perpetuity so that it doesn't become unaffordable in future. So often this is done by removing the cost of the land from the equation, which I can talk about in our context a little bit in a minute. But essentially you campaign and you get land at nil cost, which helps to subsidize the cost of the housing going forward. In terms of London Community Land Trust specifically, our mission is to see communities creating permanently affordable homes and transforming neighborhoods. So there's an idea that it's not just about building the homes and creating a new island in a city. It's about ensuring that existing communities are protected and held together. So our organization started in around 2007, and it grew out of a local active campaign to build housing in East London. And we're a membership organization, so we have 3,000 members that are people that pay £1, and they have a share, and they can vote at our AGM, and they can stand on our board. And our board is made up of a mix of the people that live in our homes, people from the broader community, and the stakeholders that have particular expertise. So we believe that it's not about providing an asset for people to get on the housing ladder. It's about providing a home. So our first project in East London is we have 23 homes there, and that's actually a mixed tenure site. So there are 252 homes on a big, it used to be a workhouse, a factory in the 1840s. So an element of the building is a heritage refurbishment, and our home's a new build. So we worked in partnership with the city to get our 23 homes built, but there are also social rented homes there through a housing association and private ownership. So I guess what makes our model a little bit different from other CLTs, certainly in the UK, is that we decided to price our homes according to the median income in the local area. So that, I think in Tower Hamlets, where our first project was about £30,000. And we sold our one-bedroom homes for £130,000. Which I think comparably, is about a third of the market in that area at the time. So our product is that not only are the homes priced according to incomes, but they're affordable on an ongoing basis. So if a community member wants to sell their home, they sell it back to the Community Land Trust at the same rate that's linked to incomes. So effectively it removes the speculation and retains the affordability. We also believe in genuine community decision making. I think in London you have a lot of new developments that consult with the community, but ultimately it's just to tick a box. People don't really turn up, the contribution isn't meaningful. In our case, because the campaigns and the development they begin with that campaign, and then throughout our community steering groups are the ones that decide on the architects, the contractors, they make key design decisions. So it's sort of a lot more meaningful participation. There's Obama. He's the original community organizer. So some of the main things that we've achieved recently, obviously we only have 23 homes built. We have 11 that we're allocating now, which is our first direct development in South London. So it's the first time that we are building these homes. It's the first time that we're drawing down funding from London, the London City, to do this. But obviously we can't resolve the crisis on our own. So for us, it's about innovating and influencing as well. It's about setting a precedent for another way that affordability can be viewed and kind of being part of that conversation. We also have, so this is St. Clement's, a snapshot of the new build. this is several years ago. The balconies, I think, have more plants on them now. But these are some of our residents a couple years ago when we first moved in at our AGM. This is a render of our new build in Lewisham. And this is actually where we have campaigns across London. So we've got quite a few campaigns in the pipeline. I was going to say something briefly about our partnerships, if I have a minute. So the key thing, we have local partnerships, we have London-wide partnerships, but the thing I wanted to also mention is that we're looking out to our European partners also. For the last 4 years, we've been working with CHIC, which is Sustainable Housing for Inclusive and Cohesive Cities, which is an ERDF-funded project, which we've worked with Brussels, Lille, Ghent, another partner in London, a partner in Paris, to basically build a European-wide network and to help grow the local contexts in those areas. So for us, sorry, that's a brief thing on funding, but I'll skip through that. So for us, this was a really helpful project because it opened up a dialogue, and in this world of Brexit, it means that we have an existing platform to do things together, to communicate, to look for possible future funding that now is going to become more difficult because of Brexit, but it's great that we already had that in place. And because the funding was over 4 years, it gave us time to really develop meaningful relationships and do what we needed to do in that time. So I'll finish there.
Great. I think we will have time to go probably into more details on some of those issues in the question and answer session. Hannah, that has been, I think you've really helped us to zoom down to the local level. So from that systems level to really describe the process on the ground. And you've hit on some, I think, the key points that are going to run throughout the sessions, this session and the later sessions today. And that is it seems like a very simple and basic point, but you talked about the build to live, so building also people to live in. It seems like a really obvious point, but indeed this is what cities really need to facilitate, because we are seeing that the build to rent, let's say, concept has gained a lot of traction and is really one of the factors that is pushing people out of their homes. Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned this affordability in perpetuity. I think that's also a really one of the features that we have to be aiming at, regardless of what the scheme. And I think that this is already coming out, so it's focusing on the end goal, so this affordability in perpetuity and building homes for people to live in, regardless of what the vehicles are. So we see cooperatives, we see public, social housing providers, but they're all looking for this common goal of providing homes. So now we're going to zoom over to Bologna, and I'm really excited to hear about what's going on there on the ground. Emily, also you're working in a challenging context, so I'm sure our colleagues from Barcelona will be really curious to hear how you are facing those challenges.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here as well, and Bologna looks to Barcelona very much for its housing policies, and as you were saying, just for the fact that we want to tackle housing so much, and Barcelona has really shown us how to do that, and this last contribution was also very useful, so thank you very much. In the last decade, Bologna has become one of the most expensive cities in Italy for rent, and in fact it's the 4th Italian city for cost of rent, and it's by no means the same size as Rome or Milan or Naples or Turin. So housing has become, in fact, one of the most debated issues. In fact, a few years ago, an informal association that debated on housing rights and right to the city addressed the risks of over-tourism and of the high cost of rent, and collected over 2,000 signatures, mostly by students and young professionals, to bring the issue at the forefront of local politics. We have this form of participatory politics called istruttoria pubblica, where by raising the signatures you can sort of force the local politics to debate an issue and be part of that debate. So it's not just the local politicians who are discussing, but also those who raise the issue, and any stakeholders can have a say in the local council. So 5 parties actually responded to that impulse and have discussed a right to housing, and now we have developed a sort of integrated number of solutions to tackle this issue. So one of the most important aims, of course, is going to be increasing our building stock and trying to do that without consuming new soil. This is, of course, the great question in our time. So what we're trying to do is renovate our existing building stock and making it also more efficient energy-wise. One of the most important decisions, of course, is that our social housing will no longer have the option to rent and then buy. So absolutely, we won't be able to buy if we had been renting, so only rent with no option to buy. And be mindful that in Italy, not all youth are able to live on their own. Sure, one could probably culturally make a joke about how we are very attached to our families, and that's also true, but it's also a question of cost of living. So low incomes for younger generations and just the unaffordability of housing, precarious jobs, etc. So if the European average age of leaving home is around 26 years of age, Italy is breaking on 30 years of age. So a big difference. Another concept we have to keep in mind, and that it was interesting what you were saying before, is that renting is not that frequent in Italy. Like 80% of Italians own a house. So there's really the mental concept that owning is more secure, gives you more stability, and it's not that common to actually rent and to have collaborative models. So we really have to challenge that idea too. Put together the young data and the data on owning homes, and what you have is a situation where that 80% of Italians that owns a house, only 6% of that number is under 35 years of age. So the greatest problem, of course, is for youth. So in that context, experiences like Porto 15 were created. Porto 15 is one of our newest collaborative models that I want to talk to you a little bit about. And it's a project where the city of Bologna's housing policy sector won considerable financing from the youth department of the presidency of our Council of Ministers to promote the autonomy of young adults or adults under the age of 35. And what happened is we found this building that was already in our city, renovated it, and have developed this co-housing model where the citizens seek to live together and seek to have a different way of living. So common spaces, an idea of helping each other. They have an agreement and a sort of statute of what the residents of that experience are supposed to do in this collaborative living model. It's had great success. 18 families moved into this co-housing and have been sharing their living and also their difficulties. So it really brings people together in a different way of living. And so after that positive experience, we've started discussing about how to work with private citizens to further develop this model and develop co-housing experiences in the area. So that's definitely one of the solutions, and we've amended our urban building code to introduce a provision that facilitates this sort of way of living. And the salient elements that we have defined for collaborative living are that the number of family units involved should be at least 5. Families must be formally established in an association or another type of no-profit organization. Organizations must provide for this sort of charter of values or regulations that guarantee the openness also of their activities to the neighborhood, so have an exchange with the neighborhood they're living in. And buildings have to be, of course, designed in accordance with high standard of environmental and structural sustainability. And at least 20% of the area and no less than 50 square meters have to be common use areas for collective activities. So this is definitely one of the models. Another thing we are working on is the fact that now when you build in Bologna, if you build over 20,000 square meters, at least 30% of that has to be devolved to social housing. 20% if it's less than 7,000 square meters, but no less than that. Another thing, another idea is just the program of working on affordable housing. And so we need to map all our property, both private and public, in order to, first of all, redevelop the public housing stock, but also trying to intercept the private. Some private buildings can be acquired, but also we have to persuade small owners to rent to families, to students, to workers again, because as has happened in Barcelona, many are keeping their property empty or renting it on short-term rental platforms because they make more money on there. So what we're doing is giving tax credit to owners who rent their homes to workers or families in Bologna. And also, we need to have funding for what we call morosi incolpevoli, which is people who are blameless in paying their rent late, perhaps because they lost their job. This year, of course, it was during the pandemic, so we gave 5 times what we usually give in resources to those kind of families or workers who had difficulty during the pandemic to pay their rent. But we have to keep some sort of funding in that area even in the next few years. Even it might be less structural, but we know that when one person loses their home, it's because they have really consumed all their capital in terms of social and economic relations. So sometimes for the city to help a citizen in that moment, to help them keep their home, can also avoid a much greater cost in terms of welfare, health policies, and ultimately avoid disenfranchised citizens or marginalized citizens. So it's also another direction that might not be as structural as it is during the pandemic, but we still have to keep working on. Another direction is we are working on studying social agencies for housing, different models that we are studying in order to tackle the housing rental market in an innovative way and bring public control in this very complex area. So the municipality would be the intermediary between homeowners and tenants and helping convince homeowners to rent their houses, and knowing the homeowners will know their rent will be paid, they will have guarantees. The tenants will find fixed, affordable rents, and they'll also know that the municipality will be their guarantor, because now, since the demand is so high and the supply is so low, sometimes the citizen is asked so much paperwork and guarantees and financial guarantees just to rent a house, even though they are perfectly able to pay rent. Lastly, something that in Barcelona you know so well, in London too actually, is an issue we have to tackle together, which is regulating the short-term rental market. And that's where I think European level comes in, because a city doesn't have that much leeway in regulating this market. We are fine with homeowners sharing a room, perhaps an apartment at times when they're not using it. We can think of a time period. I know Amsterdam has fixed 60 days, for example, in a year. But we must draw the line at great real estate owners who buy, hundreds of apartments and put them on short-term rental platforms. We must draw the line at that and find a solution. And I think together, perhaps, we could force the European level to help cities in this sense.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's been really... In a very short time, you've managed to really give us an insight into the array of different tools that you're trying to implement there in Bologna. And I think you touched on a really important point at the start. And sometimes in our field, we underestimate the importance of that social acceptance and the political acceptance of a change in strategy. So you mentioned that, there are certain expectations when it comes to housing, and you need to get also people on board to support your strategy. And I think this is also why it's so important to have these type of exchanges, because people can only agree to change when they can already imagine how it will look or see examples of how it will look, because otherwise we are stuck in our own realities. This is why these type of exchanges are so important. You also mentioned the element of youth. We're hearing this more and more, so youth exclusion from the housing markets and the impact that is having on the development of their lives, but also the economy. And indeed, we have decided as Housing Europe to focus on this topic next year. It will be the European Year of Youth. And you mentioned indeed the EU focus, so we will be counting on continuing support from the city networks, so we're growing collaboration at EU level to raise issues like how the EU can facilitate the work of cities in assuring the right to housing. So you touched upon the Airbnb question. That's just one example, just looking at the obligations to a minimum of transparency of data, and also a crackdown on illegal activities, in fact, that are being facilitated through these platforms. And indeed, it's one of the issues where we're joining forces with cities, including Barcelona at European level, to look at those, complex links with the EU legislation, but which could really make a difference for the work on the ground. We're going to have now a quick introduction into another housing system. So it's going a little bit of a departure from what we've seen, because in the Netherlands there is 27% social housing in the on average in the country. So it's a little bit of a different perspective. Yes, Robin van Leyen, I think we can start the video now, is going to explain a little bit how that system works and how the so-called woningcorporatie function. Is it fine for getting the video up and running? Yes, super.
Good morning, everybody, and let me start by sending a warm welcome from the Netherlands. My name is Robin van Leyen and I work for ADES, which is the Dutch association representing social housing providers in the Netherlands. Let me start by giving an apology for not being with you here today in beautiful Barcelona. Unfortunately, about 1.5 weeks ago, we entered into a new lockdown in the Netherlands. So traveling is not really possible and we are stuck to our homes again. So my apologies for that. Today I will be talking about social housing in the Netherlands. And let me start by giving a brief overview of our members. Our members manage around 2.3 million dwellings in the Netherlands, which is about 32% of the Dutch social housing stock. This is 32% of the total housing stock in the Netherlands. They offer affordable housing to vulnerable households. That's their core mission and their main reason of being here. They have some other priorities, which include offering comfortable living, taking care of care arrangements for the elderly, energy savings, of course, dwellings for groups with special needs, and of course, they have strong ties to communities and local partners. If you take a wider look at the European picture, Sorka, I know you're moderating this panel here today. We took this picture from Housing Europe. I hope it's okay, but it gives a good overview of social housing in Europe. And there you see that with 32% of the housing stock, relatively speaking, we are the largest stock in Europe. And housing associations, some more key figures, they have an average rent about 523 euros, which is in 2018. And that is 70% of the legal allowable rent. So you really see that the members of ADES, they put affordability as the core mission. Their moving rate is about 8.1%, which is around 250,000 allocations a year in 2016. And with regards to investments, in 2016, they invested 5.1 billion for maintenance and home improvement, 2.3 billion for new construction, which comes down to around 70,000 new homes a year. An interesting element to look to is the financing of social housing in the Netherlands. Our members are all private organizations. They are not part of the government. And at the same time, there are non-profit organizations. And since the year 1995, they haven't received direct subsidies from the government. So our main source of incomes are actually rent revenues. So how do we do this? Well, the backbone of this is the Dutch Guarantee Fund, or the Social Housing Guarantee Fund. And basically, the idea of the Guarantee Fund is that when one of our members cannot pay back their loans anymore, the others step in and back that member. And this is based on the three-tier system. And the first part of that three-tier system is the fund itself. There's a reserve of the Guarantee Fund. So if one of our members cannot meet their financial obligations anymore, they can draw upon that reserve. If that is insufficient, the second option would be the guarantee that the members have towards each other. So this is a legal obligation in the Netherlands. Basically, the idea is if one of the members cannot pay back the loans, all the other members have to step in and finance that to take care of that obligation. And as third and final part of that guarantee fund system, there's a government guarantee. Basically, you could say that the government guarantees the guarantees fund. So if there's not enough money in the reserves, if there's not enough money with all the social housing providers together, then the government can step in. And so far, this has never been necessary. Well, this fund has a AAA status at Moody's and Standard & Poor's. And because of that status, our members have very easy access to capital at low interest rates, because basically it's guaranteed that the investor will always get their money back. So the topic here today is about collaboration models. In the Netherlands, we do not really have a system with cooperatives of community land trust. This is developed in many other countries, and somehow in the Netherlands, this doesn't really have a strong tradition. So for us, collaboration is participation, and participation means the role of the tenant in the decision-making of the social housing providers. We have 3 points for that. First is that the tenants are represented in the supervisory board of a social housing provider. Second is what we call 70% rule. That means that before renovation works can start, 70% of all tenants need to agree to that. And the final part, and that's the part that I would like to focus here on today, are the tripartite agreements. So moving to those tripartite agreements, basically the idea is that housing associations, municipalities, and tenant organization consult with each other about performance agreements. And those agreements state what the plans are for housing policies for the coming year. This is not something that we take lightly. This is actually a legal obligation from the Dutch Housing Act in 2050. And those agreements are contractual agreements, so that's not something voluntarily. And all partners in those agreements, be it the tenants, the city itself, or the social housing providers, are there on equal footing. They may have different interests, but their status on the negotiation table is equal. And those tripartite agreements include issues such as affordability, of course, but also new constructions. How many new homes are we going to build for the next year? And also livability. And finally, ever more important today, renovations. How many homes are we going to make energy friendly the next year? So this is the best practice that we can share from the Netherlands. I hope it's useful for your conference today. I also wish you a very nice conference. Should you have any questions, I'm not here today, unfortunately, but do not hesitate to contact me. Here is my email address. Enjoy your conference and have a nice day. Thank you.
Great. I think that it's a really pity that Robin is not here in person, but I must say from a Housing Europe perspective, we can really rely on the Netherlands whenever we look for responsible housing initiatives. For examples around energy retrofit, around integration, around right sizing, so for adapting homes to elderly. It's such a source of innovation and inspiration, and I think it is because at the end of the day they got a lot of the basic building blocks of the system right, and they have that critical mass of housing that is built to live in and not just to make a profit from. They managed to really have that up there in one of the highest percentages in Europe. We have, I must mention, it was also the Netherlands was the first country which held the International Social Housing Festival. Because even if it is a very established system, they need to constantly reinforce that political support and that social acceptance and that recognition of the role they play. So this festival, which will actually, Barcelona will actually take up the idea and have the fourth International Social Housing Festival next year, 2023, sorry, with Helsinki hosting it next year in June 2022. I think it will be a forum where we can all sort of come together and touch base as well. So now I think we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm curious to see what will be coming up on the screen. But while we are waiting for that, maybe you would like to... yes, you mentioned the Brexit word earlier on. Maybe it would be nice to hear a little bit about just that perspective on whether you think that's going to impact the work and the capacity to exchange across Europe.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think, as I mentioned with our Chic project, we're fortunate to already have a platform of sharing, and the thing about Community Land Trust is it's really a global grassroots movement, and we were all in touch before Brexit and will continue to be in touch after Brexit. I think we aren't able to renew the current funding we have with ERDF for another year due to Brexit, and there are pots that are being taken off the table. But we're currently looking at Horizon Europe, which will kind of give us another platform if we were successful with that funding to continue kind of growing our relationships and developing community land trusts. So in short, some funding might be limited, but we still have the relationships and the shared resource, so I think we will be okay.
We are definitely open to foster that collaboration as much as possible. We have a question coming through from the screen here, and I think it really hits on a crucial one. We see in the sector that land is really the next frontier when it comes to assuring the right to housing. It's constituting from more than 30% of the price of delivery of affordable housing. So access to that land is crucial. And as raised earlier, there is also the climate question and the need to really reduce the use of green sites. But this question coming through, maybe you would like to address it. This, because of it's a scarce resource. Do you have any ideas to put on the table on how we can indeed foster a more collaborative approach and not avoid the situation where we are pitting different social actors against each other? Would either of you like to come in on that?
Well, one way I have to say we have laws like regional regulation on how much land you can use. So already there's a limit by our laws, but definitely what we are trying to do is setting up with new housing, especially new possibilities of building housing on land, is being regulated by asking cooperations to co-design the process together and sort of come together in a collaboration in the project. And so we're trying to redesign the participatory project that way, making them work together right at the beginning instead of competing against each other. Like, you get more points if you co-design and participate with other subjects. as opposed to just entering the competition for that soil on your own. So that's one way of looking at it, perhaps.
Tana?
I mean, I think that's also what I've heard Barcelona doing as well. I think with our projects, we have a set funding pot, and we're still, certainly with the Community Land Trust, in the position where we are bidding against others, unfortunately. So I think we can learn something from this context. We have found that when we're putting bids in, because we do a lot of organizing around the sites, we develop a lot of relationships, it does minimize any opposition to the planning that we get, because we have this kind of popular support. So I think for us, building strong relationships and gathering support is key.
I think indeed there's now a big push in Barcelona to ensure that the regulation of land can help promote access to affordable housing, and they're looking with interest on how to scale up, also inspired by the CLT model. There's another question coming through also on that model, and indeed a key one here in Spain, when there's a constant debate on the advantages and disadvantages of home ownership versus rental housing, when we all know that indeed the reality shows that much of people's income is going into overinflated rental prices. But when it comes to CLTs, are you promoting, only supporting, in your case, home ownership? Or indeed, does the model lend itself to the promotion of cooperative or rental housing?
Yeah, I think ultimately the model can be flexible and can lend itself, and we're seeing across the UK a rise in cooperative, co-housing, different versions of community land trusts. I think, as you said, there's such a history in the UK of home ownership, and the perception of renting is that it's really unstable. So when we ran our initial listening campaign, the desire with our model was home ownership. And I think because we have such limited resources, we want to consolidate one model. But there is some discussion with our board about how we can kind of broaden that going forwards. We had an instance where we did rent one of our homes to someone we'd allocated for a short period of time, because they weren't yet eligible for the home and they were in need. So I think, yeah, the model can definitely be flexible.
Thank you. And another question coming through, being addressed to Emily. And on the topic, indeed, of co-housing, is this one of the vehicles you're promoting as well?
Yeah, so basically, when we amended our regulations on housing, we first of all defined what we intend by collaborative models and co-housing, and those were, the 5 families and having the charter of values together. And what we do is, for example, in order to encourage their creation, we waive the requirement to provide for a minimum number of parking spaces, which is often one of the most expensive parts of designing a new building. So also we try to help them with rent, and we try to help them with acquiring buildings that perhaps were of the city, of the municipality, or locate buildings. So definitely we're trying to find the practical way of instead of putting forth this model. It's one of the solutions we're working on as together with all the others, but it's definitely one model that's going to grow more and more. Porto 15 was a great first new experience, because we do have a tradition of cooperation and collaborative housing that goes back even hundreds of years, but those buildings were built in a different era, so there wasn't the idea of the common spaces and the sharing, so it's just like sort of normal council housing apartments. So now we're definitely working more on a shared environment space. Yeah.
One to watch Great. I think that's bringing us to the end of the session. And before we, now there is a break on the agenda, and then we will start to hear more about what Barcelona is doing in promoting different types of models. I see a question from the audience. I don't know if we have time just to address that. That's fine. I think before we wrap up, yes.
Buenos días, Ángel Fernández de
My name is Ángel Fernández. I come from Getafe, in the center of Spain.
Porque eliminaría gran parte de la discusión alquiler-compraventa.
One of the issues to solve the dichotomy between rent and acquisition would be durability. Both the rent and the purchase. Well, if you buy, then that's durable. I believe renting should have durability for tenants as well if we want to equalize both things. Otherwise, they're not comparable. So tenants should be able to decide if they want to stay living in that home, rented home.
No se puede hablar de vivienda accesible.
Of durability, we cannot talk
I think
about
you've touched
accessible
on a really
housing.
important point, and I would just, and it's one with no easy answer. So it's this comparison between ownership and access to rental. And the only way we can really put this on an equal footing is to ensure the rights, indeed, that the rights to stay in that home are equivalent. So indeed, a really crucial point, and I'm sure we'll be going into it in more detail. It's a big discussion here in Spain because of your recent plan. Would you like to react quickly on that, on this, before I think we really do have to wrap up then? Yeah.
Just like 30 seconds is, yeah, for sure. Like our models that are really thought for the younger part of the population are shorter, like 8-10 years, just because they're thought for people who are between, you know, young professional students. But the greater part of our building stock that's social housing doesn't have limits on how long you can stay there. So definitely there are ways we're going in that direction also, yeah.
It's contracts, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of durability, I know there is a community land trust in Bristol that's, I just remembered, that's solely rental, and then, you know, they have a baseline that you live there 5 years, so it's sort of that security of tenure, and maybe then from our experience, the purchasing price being connected to genuinely what people earn can help balance that, stabilize that.
Yeah, great. I think that's a great way to wrap up, because it brings us full circle back to the Housing 2030, which really stresses that if the right regulations, if the right system is not in place, then these projects will reach their limit. So thank you very much for that intervention, and thank you so much for the inspiration. And I hope also we will see a lot of these projects coming in, being proposed for the Responsible Housing Awards, which we run together with the International Union of Tenants, so Barbara Steinbergen, who spoke yesterday, so that we can continue to gather all of those inspirations together. So please join me in thanking the panelists today and for a great session. It was really good.